Clara Whitfield was 17 years old, blind since birth, and standing in a parking lot outside a county courthouse in Harlan, Kentucky, with everything she owned stuffed into a garbage bag at her feet, when a lawyer she had never met pressed a single sheet of paper into her hands and told her she had just inherited a barn. Not a house, not land worth anything. A barn. A collapsed, rotting barn on the edge of a town called Deerfield, 40 miles east of anywhere that mattered, appraised at exactly $200. The lawyer's voice was dry and apologetic. He said her grandfather, a man named Ezra Whitfield, had died 11 days earlier in a veterans hospital in Lexington. He said Ezra had left the barn to her specifically, not to her father, who had disappeared when Clara was 3, not to her mother, who had overdosed in a motel bathroom in 2021, to Clara, by name. The will was dated 1997, the year she was born, and it contained a single handwritten note at the bottom that the lawyer read aloud because Clara could not read print. It said, "The girl will know what to do with what is underneath." Clara stood there in the October wind, her white cane folded against her chest, the garbage bag leaning against her ankle. She could smell gasoline from the road and dead leaves and the particular metallic scent of coming rain. She had aged out of foster care 6 weeks earlier. Her last placement, a woman named Deborah in a ranch house outside of Corbin, had handed her $400 in cash, a prepaid phone, and a ride to the bus station. Deborah had been kind enough, but the state check stopped coming the day Clara turned 17 and a half, under the early emancipation she had requested herself. And kindness without money is a door that eventually closes. She had been sleeping in the doorway of a laundromat for 9 days. The owner, an older man who smelled like fabric softener and cigarettes, let her stay until 6 in the morning when the first customers arrived. She ate from gas stations. Dollar bags of chips, 99-cent hot dogs, kept under heat lamps, so long they tasted like warm rubber. She counted her money by folding the bills into shapes she had memorized, ones folded in half, fives folded into triangles, tens left flat. She had $211 left. And now she had a barn. The lawyer offered to drive her. She said yes, because she had no other option, and because the note at the bottom of the will kept turning over in her mind like a stone she could feel, but not yet see the shape of. The girl will know what to do with what is underneath. Her grandfather had written those words the year she was born. She had never met him. Her mother had never spoken about him. Not once, not even at the end when the pills made her talk about everything else. Memories spilling out like water from a cracked jar. Ezra Whitfield was a silence in her family's mouth. And now he had left her something. And the something was a collapsed barn worth less than the cash in her pocket. They drove for an hour and 14 minutes. Clara counted the turns. She always counted turns. It was how she built maps inside her head, the only maps she would ever have. Left off the highway, right at what the lawyer said was a gas station. Straight for a long time on a road so rough she could feel every crack through the seat. Then right again, onto what felt like gravel, the tires crunching and popping, the car tilting slightly to the left, as if the road itself was leaning away from wherever they were going. The lawyer stopped the car. He said, "This is it." Clara opened the door and stepped out, and the first thing she noticed was the silence. Not ordinary silence. The silence of a place that had been abandoned so long even the birds had moved on. Then, slowly, sounds came in. Wind through tall grass. A creak, rhythmic and low, like a door moving on a hinge somewhere. And beneath it all, a faint hum she could feel more than hear, vibrating up through the ground into the soles of her shoes. The air smelled like rot and rust and something else, something almost sweet, like old hay that had been sitting in darkness for decades. "Can you describe it to me?" she asked. The lawyer cleared his throat. He said the barn was about 50 yards ahead. It had partially collapsed on the east side. The roof caved in at an angle, half the wall still standing but leaning badly. "Gray wood," he said. "Weather to the color of bone." There was a stone foundation visible where the collapse had pulled the boards away. Weeds as high as his waist growing up through everything. A rusted weather vane on the one corner of the roof, still intact, shaped like a rooster, turning slowly in the wind. That was the creaking sound. He said there was nothing else around. No other buildings, no neighbors within sight. Just rolling hills, brown and gold as autumn, and a tree line about 200 yards to the north. The property was 1.3 acres according to the deed. Clara thanked him. She asked if there were steps or a clear path to the barn. He said there was something that might have been a path once, pressed down through the weeds. She unfolded her cane and began to walk. The lawyer called after her. He asked if she wanted him to wait. She said no. She said she would be fine. She heard his car pull away, tires on gravel, engine fading, and then she was alone with the barn in the wind, and the creaking rooster and that strange hum coming up through the earth. The path was rough. Her cane found rocks, thick weed stems, a piece of metal that rang when she tapped it, probably a fallen hinge or bracket. She moved slowly. 17 years of blindness had taught her that the world reveals itself to those who are patient enough to listen. She had never been in a hurry about anything. Hurry was for people who trusted their eyes, and eyes, her mother had once said in a rare moment of cruel honesty, were just another way of lying to yourself. She reached the barn wall. Her free hand found the wood, and she pulled it back immediately. The surface was rough, splintered, cold. It felt like touching the skin of something very old and very tired. She ran her fingers along it more carefully. The grain was deep, the kind that comes from decades of weather, sun expanding the wood, frost contracting it, rain seeping in and drying out, over and over, until the surface becomes almost geological, like a tiny landscape of ridges and valleys. She followed the wall to what her cane told her was an opening. Not a door. The door was gone. Just a gap where a door had been, wide enough to walk through. She stood at the threshold and listened. Inside, the air was different. Cooler. Denser. The smell of old hay was stronger here, mixed with something like damp stone and, faintly, machine oil. She could hear water dripping somewhere, slow and irregular, each drop echoing slightly, which told her the interior space was larger than she expected. She stepped inside. Her cane swept the floor. Wood planks, some solid, some soft with rot, some missing entirely, her cane dipping into gaps and finding dirt or stone underneath. She moved along the wall, keeping contact with it, mapping the space. The barn was roughly rectangular. She estimated 30 feet by 40, based on her pace count. The collapsed section was to her right, where the floor was buried under debris, broken beams and roofing material that her cane couldn't navigate. But the left side was mostly intact, and against the far wall, her cane struck something that was not wood and not stone. Metal, a flat metal surface set into the floor, about 3 feet by 3 feet based on her cane's sweep, a seam around the edge. And in the center, a ring, an iron ring, thick and cold, standing upright from the surface like a handle. A trapdoor. Clara knelt down. She placed both hands on the metal surface. It was cold, colder than the air around it, as if the temperature below was different from the temperature above. She found the ring and pulled. Nothing moved. She adjusted her grip, braced her knees against the floor, and pulled harder. The metal groaned. Rust cracked. And then it lifted, heavy and slow, like the lid of something that had been sealed for a very long time. Air rushed up from below, and the smell hit her like a wall. Not rot, not decay, something else entirely. Paper. Old paper, the kind that yellows and develops that particular sweet, dusty vanilla scent of aging cellulose. And behind it, leather. And behind that, something floral, dried flowers, lavender maybe, faint but unmistakable. There were stairs. Her cane found the first step, stone, solid, descending into the dark. Not that darkness mattered to Clara. Darkness was where she lived. It was everyone else who was afraid of it. She went down. 14 steps. She counted each one. The walls on either side were stone, rough-cut, cool and slightly damp under her fingertips. At the bottom, the space opened up. The echo changed, her footsteps suddenly sounding wider, more resonant. She swept her cane in a full circle and hit nothing for the first 3 feet in any direction. Then to her left, shelves, wooden shelves, sturdy, not rotting like the barn above, lined with objects she began to touch one by one. Jars, glass jars, sealed, dozens of them, cool and smooth. Books, thick ones, thin ones, their spines cracked but intact. Folded fabric, rough like canvas. Small wooden boxes with hinged lids. Metal tins. And papers, loose papers and bound notebooks, stacked in careful piles. Her hands found a large envelope, thick and heavy, sealed with something waxy. She broke the seal and reached inside and pulled out several sheets of paper. And then her fingers found something she recognized immediately. Braille. Someone had written in Braille. Line after line of raised dots under her fingertips, and the first word she read made her stop breathing. Dear Clara, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and you have found my workshop. I have been waiting 20 years for you to arrive. I am sorry I could not meet you in person. Your mother would not allow it. But I have been preparing this place for you since the day you were born, and everything in this room is yours. Clara sat down on the stone floor. She pressed the letter against her chest, and she cried. She cried the way only someone who has been fundamentally alone can cry, with her whole body shaking, soundless at first, and then not soundless. The sobs echoing off the stone walls of a room built by a man she never knew for a girl he never met, but loved enough to learn an entirely new language of touch just to speak to her. She read the rest of the letter over the next hour, sitting on that cold floor, her fingers moving over the dots with the practiced speed of someone who had read Braille since she was 4. Ezra Whitfield had been a carpenter, a master carpenter, trained by his own father who had been trained by his father before him, a line of woodworkers stretching back to the 880s in these Kentucky hills. He had built furniture, tables, chairs, cabinets, desks, but not ordinary furniture. He described his work as memory furniture, pieces that contained hidden compartments, secret drawers, false bottoms, each one designed to hold something precious, a letter, a photograph, a locket, a lock of hair. He had sold them throughout Appalachia for 40 years, and when arthritis took his hands in 1995, he had stopped building for clients and started building for Clara. The workshop beneath the barn contained 37 pieces of finished furniture. Each one, he wrote, contained a hidden compartment, and each compartment held something he had placed there for her. Letters, stories about her family, a gold pocket watch that had belonged to her great-great-grandfather, her grandmother's wedding ring, dried flowers from her mother's childhood garden, pressed between sheets of wax paper, a small fortune in hand-carved chess pieces made from black walnut and white oak, each set worth, according to a dealer in Louisville, between $800 and $1,200. But that was not what made the whole town weep. Not yet. Clara spent the first night in the barn. She did not sleep. She sat in the underground workshop and read every Braille letter her grandfather had left, 7 of them in total, each one tucked in the hidden compartment of a different piece of furniture. He told her about her mother as a child, bright and laughing, a girl who loved horses and thunderstorms and the smell of sawdust. He told her about how the addiction had come, slowly at first, then all at once, like a river swallowing a road. He told her about the day her mother had taken Clara and left, and told Ezra he would never see either of them again. He told her he had tried. Court orders, letters, phone calls. None of it worked. Her mother moved every few months, a pattern of vanishing that addiction teaches its students with ruthless efficiency. So he built. He built because it was the only thing he knew how to do. He built furniture with secrets inside because his whole life had become a secret. A grandfather who loved a granddaughter he was not allowed to know. And every competition, a smile can be your secret strength. That smile can be your secret strength. And though that she had never been truly alone, morning came. Clara knew it because the air in the workshop shifted, warmed slightly, and she could hear birds now, distant but present, as if the dawn had reminded them this place existed. She climbed the stairs and stood in the ruined barn and felt the sun on her face through the gaps in the collapsed roof. warm and direct, the kind of October sun that feels like a hand on your cheek. She had a decision to make. The furniture was valuable. She could sell it. A dealer, a collector, someone who appreciated handmade Appalachian craft. She could take the money and leave and find an apartment somewhere and start a life that looked like other people's lives. She could close the trapdoor and walk away from this collapsed barn on its 1.3 acres of nothing and never come back. Or she could stay. The first obstacle came 3 days later. Clara had been sleeping in the barn, wrapped in a canvas tarp she found in the workshop, eating crackers and canned peaches from a gas station 2 miles down the road, a walk she made by counting steps and listening for traffic when a truck pulled up the gravel drive. The man's name was Dale Creeby. He was the county code enforcement officer, and he told Clara, in a voice that was not unkind but was completely inflexible, that the structure was condemned. No one could legally occupy it. He said she had 30 days to either demolish it or bring it up to code. And since bringing a collapsed barn up to code would cost more than the property was worth, he suggested she demolish it and sell the land. Clara asked him how much the land was worth. He said maybe $4,000. Maybe $5,000, if she was lucky. She asked him what would happen if she didn't demolish it and didn't leave. He said the county would do it for her and send her the bill. He drove away. Clara stood in the weeds and listened to his engine fade and felt the familiar weight of the world pressing down on her chest, the weight she had carried her whole life, the weight of being a person the world had not been designed for, a blind girl in a sighted world, a poor girl in a world that cost money just to stand in, an orphan in a world built on the assumption that someone, somewhere, loves you enough to catch you when you fall. She almost quit. She sat on the stone foundation of the barn and considered her options. She had $211 minus what she had spent on food, so maybe $170. She had a phone with limited minutes. She had no family, no friends, no address, no job, no plan. She had a collapsing barn full of furniture made by a dead man she had never met. And then she remembered something from the fourth letter. Ezra had written about a woman named Ruth Ann Bellamy, who ran a second-hand store in Deerfield. He said Ruth Ann was the only person who knew about the workshop. He said Ruth Ann could be trusted. He said, if you need help, go to Ruth Ann. She will not turn you away. Clara walked to Deerfield. It took her an hour and 40 minutes. She counted every step. She listened for road sounds to stay on the shoulder. A dog barked at her from a yard. A truck slowed and the driver asked if she needed a ride. She said no. She kept walking. The second-hand store was called Bellamy's, and Ruth Ann was 73 years old, and when Clara walked through the door with her white cane and said, "My grandfather was Ezra Whitfield," Ruth Ann dropped a teacup on the floor, and it shattered, and neither of them moved for a long time. Ruth Ann had known Ezra for 40 years. She had sold his furniture in her store. She had visited the workshop. She had watched him learn Braille from library books, his arthritic fingers struggling with the tiny dots, practicing on sheets of paper at her kitchen table while she made coffee, cursing quietly when he got a letter wrong, starting over, always starting over, because, he said, I will not send that girl a single word she can't read perfectly. Ruth Ann closed the store that day. She drove Clara back to the barn. She stood in the workshop and looked at the 37 pieces of furniture and the letters and the hidden compartments, and she told Clara something that changed everything. She said, your grandfather didn't just build furniture. He taught a class. Every Saturday morning for 15 years, right here in this workshop, he taught 8 or 9 local kids how to work with wood. He called it the Saturday School. Most of those kids are grown now. They're in their 20s and 30s. Carpenters, contractors, a couple of them furniture makers in their own right. And every competition, a smile can be your secret strength. A smile can be your secret strength. Ruth Ann made phone calls that night. By the next morning, 4 trucks were parked on the gravel drive. By noon, there were 9. They came with tools. Circular saws, nail guns, levels, sawhorses, rolls of tar paper, bundles of reclaimed lumber. A man named Jesse, 31, who ran a roofing company in Hazard, brought enough material to cover a building twice the size of the barn. A woman named Darla, 28, who had learned dovetail joints from Ezra when she was 12, brought a truck full of salvaged oak flooring from a church renovation. A teenager named Marcus, 17 like Clara, who was the son of one of Ezra's original students, brought sandwiches and a portable radio and an energy that made the whole site feel like something living instead of something dead. Clara could not see what they were building, but she could hear it, the rhythm of hammers, the whine of saws, the shouts across the site. Hold that end, level it off, watch the joist. She could smell sawdust, fresh and sharp, a smell she realized she had been smelling her whole life without knowing where it came from, because it was in her blood, and her family's blood, the Whitfield blood that had been cutting and shaping wood for 140 years. They did not rebuild the barn. They transformed it. They kept the stone foundation, which Ezra had laid himself in 1968 and which was as solid as the day he had placed it. They kept the 3 walls that were still standing and reinforced them with new framing. They rebuilt the collapsed east wall and raised a new roof, not flat like the original, but peaked, with a small cupola at the top where the weather-vane rooster was reinstalled, still creaking, still turning. They insulated it. They ran electricity from a pole in the road, a connection that cost $600, paid for by a collection Ruth Ann organized at the Deerfield Baptist Church. They installed a wood stove that Jesse found in a salvage yard, cast iron from the 1940s, heavy as a small car. They put in windows, real windows, glass and frame, donated by a contractor in Lexington who had once bought an Ezra Whitfield writing desk and found a love letter from 1922 hidden inside the false bottom. By the 3rd week, they had turned the barn into a home. A small home, a single room on the ground level with the workshop still intact below, but a real home with a wood floor and a working stove and a sink fed by a well that Jesse's crew dug in 2 days and a composting toilet behind a partition that Darla built from reclaimed church pews. Clara stood in the center of the finished space and turned in a slow circle and felt the warmth of the stove on her left side and the cool air from the window on her right. And she said, "It smells like him." And even though she had never met Ezra Whitfield, everyone in the room knew exactly what she meant, because the sawdust was the same sawdust, the wood was the same species, the hands that had shaped it had been trained by the same hands that had built the original, and the room smelled like continuity, like a family story that had been interrupted but not ended. Dale Creevy came back on day 29, 1 day before his deadline. He walked through the barn, now a house, and checked the framing, the electrical, the foundation, the roof. He didn't say much. He wrote things on a clipboard. When he was finished, he stood outside and looked at the weather-vane rooster turning in the wind, and he said to Clara, "It passes." Then he paused and said, "Your grandfather built my mother a hope chest in 1979. She kept her letters from my father in it. He died in the mines in 1983. That chest is the most valuable thing my family owns." He got in his truck and drove away. Clara began to sell the chest sets. Ruth Ann handled the transactions. Each set, hand-carved from black walnut and white oak, went for between $900 and $1,400. There were 11 sets. Clara kept one. The money gave her a foundation. She bought food. She bought propane for a backup heater. She bought a braille display for her phone so she could access the internet. But the chest sets were not the real treasure. The real treasure was the furniture itself, and Clara did not sell a single piece. Instead, she did something no one expected. She opened the hidden compartments. All 37 pieces. One by one, over the course of several months, she explored every secret drawer, every false bottom, every sliding panel. And in each one, she found not just the items Ezra had described in his letters, but something more. She found letters that were not written to her. Letters written by other people tucked into the furniture before Ezra had stopped selling to clients, before he had dedicated his work to Clara. Letters from wives to husbands. From mothers to sons, from fathers to daughters they had not spoken to in years. Love letters, apology letters, goodbye letters. Letters sealed and hidden in secret compartments, and never retrieved because the furniture had been sold, resold, donated, lost track of, and eventually ended up in the workshop where Ezra had collected it back over the decades, buying his own pieces at yard sales and estate sales and flea markets, gathering them like a shepherd, gathering scattered sheep. There were over 60 letters. Some dated back to the 1970s. Some were from people still living in Deerfield, in Harlan, in the small towns dotting the Kentucky hills like scattered seeds. Clara had Ruth Ann read her the letters that were not in Braille. They sat in the workshop by the light of a lantern, Ruth Ann's voice cracking and sometimes stopping entirely, because the letters were the kind that break you open. A woman named Eloise had written to her son in 1981, apologizing for not being strong enough to leave his father, a violent man, a man who had driven the son away at 16. The letter said, "I put this where he can't find it, and maybe someday you will, and you'll know I chose you in my heart, even when my body couldn't follow." The son, Ruth Ann said quietly, still lived in Deerfield. His name was Tom Barker. He was 61 years old. He had not spoken to his mother in 43 years. Eloise had died in 2006. Clara asked Ruth Ann to take her to Tom Barker. He lived in a small house on the other side of town. He answered the door smelling like coffee and motor oil. Ruth Ann explained who Clara was. She explained about the furniture, the hidden compartments, the letters. Tom Barker listened without speaking. When Clara held out the letter, the paper so old it felt like cloth between her fingers, Tom took it and read it standing in his doorway, and then he sat down on his front step, and he wept. He wept in that terrible way that middle-aged men weep when they have spent their entire lives building a wall against a single memory, and the wall finally comes down, not with a crash, but with a whisper, a voice from the dead saying, "I chose you." Clara returned every letter. It took months. Some recipients were easy to find. Some had moved away. Some were dead, and Clara gave the letters to their children or grandchildren. Every delivery was different. Some people were angry at first, suspicious, unwilling to believe that a blind teenage girl had found a secret message from their past hidden inside a piece of furniture in a collapsed barn. But the letters were undeniable. The handwriting was recognizable. The details were specific. And one by one, the people of Deerfield and the surrounding towns received words that have been waiting for them, in some cases for decades, hidden in drawers they never knew existed, in furniture they had sat beside and eaten at, and walked past every day without knowing that a message was inches away, waiting. The town did not weep all at once. It wept in installments. Tom Barker on his front step. A woman named Grace, who received a letter from her late husband, written 6 months before his death, confessing that the happiest moment of his life was not their wedding or the birth of their children, but a Tuesday afternoon in 1988 when she had fallen asleep on his shoulder during a rainstorm and he had sat perfectly still for 2 hours rather than wake her. A man named Curtis, who received a letter from the father who had abandoned him at age 7. A letter that did not ask for forgiveness, but simply said, "I think about you every single day, and every single day I am ashamed." By the following spring, Clara Whitfield was no longer a stranger in Deerfield. She was the girl who lived in the barn. She was the girl who brought back the letters. Children from the town came to visit her on Saturday mornings, and she began teaching them. Not woodworking, she had never learned that, but Braille. She taught them to read with their fingers. She taught them to build maps inside their heads. She taught them that the world has textures and temperatures and sounds that most people never notice because they are too busy looking. Jesse and Darla and Marcus kept coming. They expanded the barn. They added a small covered porch. They planted a garden that Ruth Ann helped design, herbs and vegetables and raised beds that Clara could tend by touch, feeling for weeds between the rows of basil and tomatoes, knowing a ripe pepper by its weight and firmness, knowing thyme from rosemary by the way the leaves crumbled between her fingers. On a warm evening in late May, Almost 8 months after she had first stood in that courthouse parking lot with a garbage bag at her feet, Clara sat on the porch of her barn and listened to the weather vane creak overhead, and the garden rustle in the breeze, and the crickets beginning their nightly argument in the tall grass. Ruth Ann had gone home. The Saturday children had gone home. The light she could not see was doing something the others described as turning gold, the way it does in Kentucky in the late spring, when the sun drops low enough to make everything look like a painting of itself. She held the last letter, the one she had found in the final piece of furniture, a small writing desk with a single hidden drawer so perfectly fitted that even her sensitive fingers had almost missed the seam. The letter was in Braille. It was the shortest one Ezra had written. It said, "Clara, I built all of this because I could not hold you. Every joint, every drawer, every hidden space is a place where I put my love because I had nowhere else to put it. I do not know if you will be happy. I do not know if the world will be kind to you. But I know that you will find us because you are a Whitfield, and Whitfields do not stop looking until they find what is hidden. You were never lost. You were just not found yet." She folded the letter and held it against her chest the same way she had held the first one, in the dark workshop, on the stone floor, 7 months, an entire lifetime ago. The rooster turned on the roof. The wind carried the smell of lavender from a bush Ruth Ann had planted near the porch steps, and the scent mixed with sawdust and warm wood and the particular sweetness of an old house that has been brought back to life. Clara did not cry this time. She smiled. And if you had been standing there, watching this blind girl on the porch of a barn that should have been nothing but was everything, you might have noticed that she was looking out at the hills. Her sightless eyes pointed at the horizon, as if she could see something the rest of us couldn't. And maybe she could. Maybe what she saw was not the landscape, but the shape of a life that had been built for her, board by board, letter by letter, secret by secret, by a man who understood that love does not require presents. It requires only the faith that someday someone will open the door you built, walk down the stairs you laid, and find what you left behind. The barn still stands on its 1.3 acres outside Deerfield. The weather vane rooster still turns. On Saturday mornings, if you drive past on that gravel road, you can hear children laughing inside, their fingers learning to read a language made of raised dots, taught by a girl who sees the world in ways the rest of us have forgotten how to look. Some people say the barn is worth more now. Collectors have offered Clara money for the furniture, serious money, the kind that would let her leave and live anywhere. She always says the same thing. She says, "Why would I leave? I am already home." And if you ask the people of Deerfield about the barn and the blind girl and the letters hidden in the furniture, most of them will not answer right away. They will look down at their hands. They will take a breath. And then they will tell you about the day they received a letter they had waited their whole life to read, a letter hidden in plain sight, in a drawer they never knew existed, in a town they thought had nothing left to give. And almost always, before they finish telling you, they weep.